And we are live from Reno, Nevada, and Plymouth, Wisconsin.
I'm getting jacked. I'm getting pumped. I'm getting ready to go. Let's
Dang,
talk about
dude.
this.
Okay, well, today
Joe,
we're
what am I doing?
continuing. Peekaboo!
Have
Which
you
is
have you developed object permanence yet?
just lay it on us, man.
Now that we've had some fun, let's make some art.
Okay. Today we're continuing with Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, Chapter 5, The Peekaboo World.
Peekaboo.
And this chapter was quite interesting.
Maybe one of the best chapters that we've read so far. I mean, we've only read 5, but like
first 2 were pretty good.
The first 2 are good. 3 and 4. 4 was, better than I think we remembered, and then 5 is a great way to end part 1 of the book. Really sets the scene for what's to come.
Yeah, when he ends the chapter, it kind of, I don't know, it still kind of felt like this was almost the introduction, because now his main argument is to come in the last just over half of the book.
Yeah. No, he really takes his time with setting the groundwork for what his argument is going to be for the rest of the thing. So he really takes a delicately handed way of making sure he covers his ground in the historical context and in the philosophical context of discourse, of metaphor, of media. And then now he's just going to be mic dropping out all over us.
Yeah, so in this chapter, he kind of slowly works his way up. He introduces the telegraph and kind of contrasts that with his media is epistemology, furthermore, and also moves on to the photograph. Kind of does the same thing, and then, like we said, at the very end, we kind of arrive at the age of television. So that's very loosely what he talks about. We can start from the beginning, but did you have anything in particular you wanted to mention?
Well, the only thing is that what we talked about before recording is just drawing, if it's the age of television or the age of show business, compared to the age of, as Postman writes, the age of exposition, or the age of the printing press or typography, and how that is changed by the internet and the age of computing. He in this chapter he mentions computers, but the computers of 1985 are not the computers of today. And so even his discussion and introduction of computing technology is antiquated in an increasingly accelerated way. And so I think it's really important for us to contextualize things in modern context along with the historical context that he talks about. I'm also very interested in the ideas he talks about photography and how it relates to the picture's worth 1,000 words or whatever, which he seems to disagree with, right? Because he's
interesting critique on the photograph there, which
absolutely,
I don't know, I didn't I found myself disagreeing at first, but then I kind of reread it and I was like, maybe he's right. I don't know, I never really thought of a photograph in this way, that it didn't need context and whatnot, which was weird.
It's interesting to try to look at the philosophy of imagery and the philosophy of photography as it pertains to discourse, because I prior to reading this book and then now rereading it, I don't think I really thought about it in that way. And I'm sure there's photographers who do that as their art form who would, disagree about some things, and that the picture, even if it's absent whatever context, it actually brings context that were not able to be provided otherwise. So there probably is a discussion to be had about the art form, but as a form of media, and especially in its form as news or information, or as a metaphor or as an epistemology, he really raises some interesting critiques. So,
Okay, so I guess we can start off at the beginning here with him talking about the telegraph, and he talked about how this is a quote here. He used the phrase "turning one neighborhood of the
mm-hmm,
whole country,"
mm-hmm,
which was and then he goes on below it to say now we can send a telegraph from Maine to Texas, but then Maine and Texas have nothing important to communicate. And I thought that was
right,
kind of interesting, and it kind of segues into this idea of I don't know, just this whole information overload. He also says it was a quote from Thoreau that was something like relevance was irrelevant or something like
mm-hmm,
that.
mm-hmm,
And I feel like this is kind of one of the points that I kind of live pretty close to about
yeah,
the type of information that I take in, not to overload myself, try to only limit what is truly relevant to me. And I think I hassle you a bit for this, maybe, that you
yeah,
take in a
yeah,
lot of information that maybe is you maybe find relevant. I don't necessarily think it is, but it's also maybe just has to do with what you're doing with that information, whether it's maybe it's education to you. But I think the part that bothers me a bit is if I see you get upset over some sort of like political event or current event, then I'm like, to me, it looks like self-immolation, and it looks so
yeah.
self-inflicted that I perhaps get a little bit annoyed.
Yeah, well, along with that, relevancy is irrelevant, and the Thoreau stuff, and you have critiqued me on this, and I'm trying to address it in some ways. And I talked to my dad about this today, but it's like, so part of the thing they talk about is like the agency or the ability to impact those things that you're taking in. You're taking in this information about, and now I'm going to take it into modern context, but
Information action ratio, he says.
yes, exactly. So if I'm concerned about Uyghur Muslims in China, and I'm aware of them, I have the information of how they're being treated. But what's the action in ratio to that? To like what can I actively do? And it's unfortunately in modern context, and they talk about it and he talks about it in the book, is like our agency is through voting or through purchasing power or through
Yeah. When he
what
talked
limited
about voting, it
activism.
made it seem kind of sad. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
this is
terribly
all
sad.
I can really do.
It's the last refuge of quote unquote action based on information that we have. And so, if I'm concerned about Palestinians in the Israel Palestine conflict, if I'm concerned about Kurds in Turkey, if I'm concerned about the wildfires in Australia or even wildfires in California, what can I actually do? How much of knowing that stuff is allowing me to affect it? In some ways, knowing about it, it's like, in the way the first step is like acknowledgement. So being aware of it is like the first step to getting you to be able to do anything. But on a practical way, I don't know. And I struggle with that. It's very depressing to me. I don't want to become apathetic to
Sure.
worldly concerns though, so I like knowing about them, and I like having the feeling that voting matters, and I like having the feeling that in some way I would have action or could, in some strange way I do have the ability to fly to China, well, not necessarily right now, or fly to Palestine, or like go to a country and be on the ground and be an activist and be a voice and be a dissident and be a protester and be all those things. So like I have that in print, like I have that capability, but there's so many other forces at work within our daily lives that it makes it a little more um, impossible seeming. So, do you want to talk about the Telegraph and at first what he says on just the very first page of the chapter, page 64, about the speed of information?
Yeah. So it didn't necessarily I don't know, I guess maybe we thought initially it was going to completely revolutionize the way we communicated, and maybe it did, but not necessarily just for the better in every dimension. The
Right.
quality, didn't increase, and it caused a lot of I guess what we already said, this kind of information overload, some unforeseen circumstances that with the speed that information is now being disseminated.
hmm So he starts by saying, at a certain point, information can only travel as fast as the human could carry it. So at one point, that's just walking, or that's horseback, or that's a ship from across an ocean, or that's, a carriage, a horse-driven carriage, or something. And then
Mm.
at a certain point, it's the rail system, it's the trains, it's the locomotive, which he says were traveling at around 30 miles per hour. And then what is the speed of the telegraph? You know, I mean, it's virtually instant with electricity and the dawn of electricity taking place in America. When we started getting the Morse code, he talks about Morse, and talks about that. So all of a sudden, we're able to translate and transfer information at a speed that is virtually instantaneous. And now, as we've seen with television and with the internet, it's even more instantaneous, which is sort of an oxymoron. Like, it's more instant than instant, the telegraph was, which is sort of, like I said, it's sort of paradoxical to say that, but the speed of information dissemination, it may have reached its peak but on the internet, but not necessarily when we start going to like the precognitive neurological and the if we get to the human machine combination, that might even be more instant. It might even be something that's biologically instant, that's separate from like reading or seeing something and acknowledging it within the brain. It might be something that's like ticking parts of the brain before you're even able to see it or hear it or read it or whatever. So, as you said, it wasn't necessarily for the better, the information overload or the increase in the speed. Postman says that it came at a considerable cost. He says for telegraphy, he did something that Morse did not foresee when he prophesied that telegraphy would make one neighborhood of the whole
Mm-hmm.
country. It destroyed the prevailing definition of information, and in doing so, gave a new meaning to public discourse. This is where that quote that you read from Thoreau comes in. Is Postman correct that it destroys the prevailing definition of information?
Sure. Or at least, I mean, I can see why he's saying that.
What is the prevailing definition of information today?
I don't know, a lot different than it was back then. It's just complete quantity over quality. There's no like critical thought. I mean, that the question you're asking me kind of makes me think of the example later in the chapter when he talks about like a pseudo context, and I think he gives an example about somebody measuring like the ilex of some sort of plant, and he goes, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And then the friend shows him a picture, and he goes, "Oh, okay, I see what you're saying now." And then you, in some way, it kind of tricks you into this, that maybe you learned something, but in reality, you really didn't. And you just obtained this information that I suppose even if you really could remember it, doesn't have any relation to your life. It's only relevant in a pseudo context at a maybe some sort of a cocktail party type of context.
Mm-hmm. Right. So information, I would say, is like a loosely defined way of the word, is like I'm reading this of the definition of information, but knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction, or the attribute inherent in and communicated by one of two or more alternative sequences or arrangements of something that produce specific effects, or a qualitative measure of content of the information or the act of informing against a person, the communication or reception of knowledge or intelligence. And on one level, that remains the same. That information has meant that in the past, in the 1800s and the 1900s, 1920s, 1950s, 1980s, and into the 2000s, information on just a definitive way means the same thing, but how it's meant in practice of use of the concept of information is now corrupted, and Postman would say maybe destroyed by telegraphy, by television, by photography, and I'm saying by the internet. Because is it if the transfer of media is instant, is that knowledge actually obtained? Is the content of the media, is that obtained through investigation, study, or instruction? No, it's not. It's just put there. Here it is. There's no investigation. There is no like agency or searching or curiosity to get it. It's just there. Boom. Peekaboo. Here it is. Fucking boom.
It has so many different parallels. I'm just thinking about all the different like scrolling mechanisms we have within media, whether it's Facebook or whatever social media you're using. You're just a constant scrolling through the wall, constant information being put your way. You use
There
YouTube, there's the recommendation bar. Just you don't even have to look for what you want, just give it to you. There it is. Before that was just TV news channels, channel surfing, just going. There it is. There it is.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think even on a definitive term, information has sort of the normal definition of information has been destroyed, because it's not obtained in the ways, knowledge is not obtained in the ways that it once was. And part of that is the speed of transference. I'm glad I looked up that definition.
Okay, so I guess this would be a good point to segue to the second component of the chapter, which is his critique on the photograph.
Yeah. But before that, on 69, just to again end the first part, it says prior to the age of I don't know if it's telegraphy or telegraphy, but whatever, I've been saying telegraphy.
I say that too, but I'm like, something about this doesn't seem right.
Is it telegraphy if it's photography or photography or whatever? Telegraphy, whatever. The information action ratio was sufficiently close so that most people had a sense of being able to control some of the contingencies in their lives. One of the things he talked about, and then I talk about with my dad, because my dad is very good about this. He doesn't, even if in his political life or economic life, doesn't necessarily, propel himself into some crime or some injustice that happened even states away or municipalities away or counties away or countries away or whatever. He's focused on what's local to him. What does he have control over? He's focused on his family, his work, the things that he can do. And on one level, he freely admits that that's somewhat selfish if he's not concerned about the Uyghur Muslims, or if he's not concerned about the Palestinians, or if he's not concerned about Armenians, or...
I don't think it would be accurate to say he's not concerned. It's not like it doesn't matter. It's not like he's some sort of evil being here, but it's just doesn't pertain to his life, I suppose.
And in his day-to-day, he's not actively willing to, or in some ways able to, address those things.
Yeah.
Short of dramatic alterations of one's way of living.
Absolutely.
So then he says, the contribution of the telegraph to public discourse was to dignify irrelevance and amplify impotence. But this was not all. Telegraphy also made public discourse essentially incoherent. And I think before we move on to talking about photography, there's something in the visual language and the plain language versus typography that is quite distinct there in what it does to discourse. I mean, dignifying irrelevance and amplifying impotence is it's in some ways a feature, not a bug of media as we see it today. But man, is it upsetting.
Yeah, if you continue reading on right where you were, the principal strength of a telegraph was its capacity to move information, not collect it, explain or analyze it. In this respect, telegraphy was the exact opposite of typography. Books, for example, are an excellent container for the accumulation, quiet scrutiny, and organized analysis of information and ideas. It takes time to write a book and to read one, time to discuss its contents, and to make judgments about their merit, including the form of their presentation. Book is an attempt to make through permanent and thought permanent and to contribute to great conversation conducted by authors of the past.
Yeah. But the telegraph, this is the italicized part, just below that. But the telegraph demands that we burn its contents. The internet, social media, the television demands of us as an audience to delete, to burn, to incinerate the contents of what's being presented to us. And part of this is about what uses of the mind does something favor. What are the intents? If there's a profit motive, what does that incentivize? What does that make the most popular, the most shareable, the most likable, the most viewable content? And then what does it mean? In many ways, some of the things are made to say, peekaboo, here it is, never think about it again. Or here it is, wow, now I've hit that passion, I've hit that nerve that makes you sad, happy, aroused, confused, upset, any of these things that are passion, not like pragmatism, that immediately you're on to the next thing. And so in that way, the contents aren't designed to be accumulated, to be collected, to be analyzed, to be conversed about. They're just there. They hit the nerve. They fucking tickle your brain in a way. And then, boom, then it's gone. It's annihilated. The value of the telegraphy is undermined by applying the tests of permanence, continuity, or coherence. Oh, this is great, man. The facts push other facts into and then out of consciousness at speeds that neither permit nor require evaluation.
Chapter live, right?
Damn near, dude. Damn near. But facts push other facts into and then out of consciousness at speeds that neither permit nor require evaluation. That's the scrolling. That's the infinite scrolling. That's the wall. That's your Facebook wall, your Twitter wall, your fucking Google, your YouTube, everything.
Absolutely.
Just pushing one thing in, pushing another thing, pushing another thing, pushing another thing at speeds so instantaneous that evaluation or some sort of accumulation and addressing of the contents of the media and the info is just combusted.
Boy, what a chapter.
Oh man. Joe, look at here I am. Whoop, I'm gone. Here I am. Wow. What hath God wrought? A disturbing answer came back. A neighborhood of strangers and pointless quantity, a world of fragments and discontinuities. God, of course, had nothing to do with it. And yet, for all the power of the telegraph, had it stood alone as a new metaphor for discourse, it is likely that print culture would have withstood its assault, would at least have held its ground. But now we're getting into the photograph, I think, the bottom of page 71. Postman thinks that print culture could have withstood the assaults of telegraphy, that had it not for the camera and the film and visual image and photography, or he's that daguerreotype or whatever. He says the primitive camera technology. And so now we're talking about why print as an epistemology and print culture did not withstand the assault of the instantaneity of telegraphy.
So, to introduce the photograph, I believe he said what the direct translation was something like writing with light, I believe.
Correct.
And he has a little bit of a problem with maybe some people referring to the photograph as some sort of language,
Mm-hmm.
which he elaborates on a little bit. To begin with, photography is a language that speaks only of particularities. Its vocabulary of images is limited to concrete representation. Unlike words and sentences, the photograph does not represent to us an idea or a concept about the world, except as we use language itself to converse the image to the idea.
Yeah. He says the photograph documents and celebrates the particularities of this infinite variety. Language makes them comprehensible. He also talks about the I'm going to say the nature, but the quality of a photograph in able to reproduce or in some ways clone reality as it is, and he thinks it doesn't. It doesn't do that. So when you take a picture of nature or a forest or the sea as a concept can't be photographed. These larger abstractions as truth, honor, love, falsehood cannot be talked about in the lexicon of pictures. He says, for showing of and talking about are very different kinds of processes. And I think that's been so blurred, the difference between showing of and talking about, in the age of talk radio, in the age of television news, in the age of the internet, where showing and talking about is sort of implied similar. So if you watch Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow or something like that, you're not having a conversation with them, but they're talking, quote unquote, about something. Or they say they're talking about something, but in reality, they're showing of something. They're not actually talking about it. And then from the audience perspective, you're not talking about it either. You're just being shown what they are saying, and it's construed what talking about something actually is. And so the language of that, as far as epistemology or metaphor, is so corrupted by the idea that showing is talking or is writing or is knowing.
At this point, do you agree with most of what he's been said here in his critique of photography and I guess almost art?
I think photography does have and is a language. But the idea is, though, that that's not equivalent to the language of language, the language of writing. I mean, painting and other forms of art, abstract art, sculpture, or whatever, architecture, all these things, they have a language, but that's language in not the linguistic terms. It's language in a philosophical way of those
because
mediums.
It still does communicate certain sentiments.
It communicates things, and there's certain formal elements that are, consistent in language, languages of all types. There are consistent formal elements of photography or painting or architecture or sculpture or whatever, or video games or movies or whatever. There is, like, if I'm thinking about filmmaking, there is a language of film. In fact, there's a book that many film schools will use as a teaching material that is about the language of filmography. But it's using language in a particular term there that is separate from the written word or the spoken word.
Mm-hmm.
So I disagree on one level, just because of the different definitions of language, as photography having a language or being its own language, because I think it does have and is and acts as its own language. But I agree 100% on that. That's not equivalent to language as a concept of, linguistics and writing and the written word and information and, the truth and epistemology.
Sure.
Not to bring in all the ways that you can now change a photograph or alter something or change a film or video. If we get into deepfakes, or we get into CGI, or we get into Photoshop in the past, or even, pre-computers, there was double exposure in, old film cameras, that you could make things in a photograph. If seeing is believing, you could change that. You could make fake things in photographs, even with models or with whatever. And so it's really important to try to, question those abilities to alter something. Whereas in a book, if you're reading it, like he says, it takes time to write, takes time to read, to analyze, to think about, is it's, you can't really go back and alter a particular writing and change it in a way that completely obliterates its original thing. Like, if I copied the Bible and I started changing the word every time the Bible says Jesus, and I replaced it with Joe, or if every time I replaced it with Jews, I replace it with black people, like, that does fundamentally change what the thing is about and what it's saying. But that's not the same as, like, changing a photograph, because we still have record of what the original was. And with altering photographs or films or anything, oftentimes you lose what the original was. It's not even achievable, especially with double exposure or things of the past, where the negative is forever corrupted and the original image is no longer attainable at all. That was a little bit of a sidebar. I just think this idea of showing of and talking about or thinking about or knowing about is a really key element if we're talking about topography to telegraphy to photography to filmography to television. And the fall of topography to telegraphy and photography is it really is axiomatic, the combination of the two that makes that possible.
It makes me wonder what Neil Postman would think about social media and how photographs are being used. He addresses loosely here, but he doesn't really address it. He's talking about true and false in terms of writing and the photograph.
Yeah, on 73.
Yeah. When applied to a photograph, the question, is it true, means only, is this reproduction of a real slice of space-time? The answer is yes. There are no grounds for argument, for it makes no sense to disagree with an unfaked photograph. And, I don't know, within the context of, well, you brought up deepfakes, but I guess within the context of social media, we still kind of do have to ask ourselves, is this true?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's quite interesting.
And are we able to do that? Do we have the faculties to be able to do that? This is a continuation from the last thing about asking, whether something is valuable, or whether something is real or fake or true or false. Are we actually, do we have the ability? And I'm not saying us individually, but society at large. Does society at large have the ability and the willingness to ask if something is true or false and figure it out in a way that's determined and definitive and absolute. Because if your mom or other people you talked about are questioning, like, I just don't know what's real anymore, do they have the ability to know that? Do they have the ability to not feel like they don't know what's real anymore?
I think we've seen a going trend for that answer.
Yeah. just above where you read, he quotes Susan Sontag, and they say a photo implies that we know about the world if we accept it as the camera records it. And then that leads into what's true or false. You know, the picture makes no no arguable propositions, makes no extended and unambiguous commentary. It offers no assertions to refute, so it is not refutable. The picture is there, boom, peekaboo. I'm showing you it. It has to be real. Here it is. Seeing is believing. That's it. You know, I had a discussion at work the other day about seeing is believing, because this guy was all being anti-vaxxy and all this shit. And I was just like, well, I mean, no, there's a lot of stuff I haven't seen that I, believe or know is true. And, seeing isn't believing. And many of people who say seeing is believing also believe things that they never saw. If they believe things about the divinity of Christ, they didn't see that. They read about it in a book, and even people of the time probably didn't see it, but they believe it as something that's like true inherently. So there's a contradiction in saying seeing is believing when they say, I don't believe that the coronavirus exists because, I don't see it and no one had it and it wasn't as bad if people do have it. So like everything's fake, everything's fucked. I don't believe that the world is round because I've never left the earth at a high enough altitude to see the curve of the horizon. So to me, the world is flat, and I'm just a seeing is believing type. And the photograph in that way, it is, and even our own eyes, our own vision, and we think it is sort of irrefutable. But now we've even seen that being corrupted. If we talk about, like I said, the manipulation of images, or the manipulations within the brain and the eye brain system and how it operates, things, I'm colorblind. I don't fucking see things as they are. And yet what I'm seeing is in some ways irrefutable, but I can be convinced, I can be swayed in a certain way.
So guess I'll just direct this question at you. See if you agree here. Initially, when I read it, I didn't really, I don't know. I was just really questioning it strongly the first time I read through it, but there is no such thing as a photograph taken out of context, for a photograph does not require one. And before I read the second sentence, when I initially read that, I was like, instinctively just like, no way, man. Like, what are you talking about? I didn't think I agree with that. And then he goes, in fact, the point of photography is to isolate images from context so as to make them visible in a different way. And I don't know, I just had to ruminate on that for a little while.
A long while. Yeah.
So what do you think? Do you agree? Disagree?
Well, like I said, if photography is a language, or film is a language, or has one, operates as such, it does, it's not absent context, right? Because as he points out, it's recontextualizing it. You're seeing a photograph in an art gallery, and it's maybe surrounded by similar photographs from similar times, from a similar artist, and a similar subject. And so there's context within the art gallery as a installation in which the photography exists outside of the context in which it was taken. But it's not without context. It's just, it's not the same context of when and of what the picture was captured in.
So you mean there's still a context, not no context? Is that what he's trying to say here?
I think he would agree with that. because he says the context is different.
Okay.
It's not. It's just not absent context.
Sure.
Though sometimes it is. Sometimes it could be. I mean, if I just show you a picture of something without any, you know, without any introduction or like preemptive discussion about this is what I'm going to show you. If I just show you something, it's pretty without context.
Yeah, okay.
If I peekaboo you, boom, here it is, you know. If the nightly news talks about a high school senior whose autistic brother was nominated and won prom king, and then there's police brutality in Atlanta, and then this hot dog company is donating a lot of food to food banks, like that stuff is without context. And that's largely what, you know, modern mainstream news media is. It's a feel good story, it's a bad story, it's a good story, it's a bad story, it's here breaking news, I just pooped. Like, you know, it's just totally without context.
The context is it just like preying on your emotions to keep you to
The
that
context,
screen.
the context, yes, exactly. The context is also this happened. This thing happened. That's the context, and this is the breaking news, the hot tip. This is the thing. It's just like,
Bear witness.
here's the thing that happened. Here's the thing that happened. Here's the thing that happened, and that's the only context in which any of those things can be related to each other.
I think he had a good phrase. I don't want to jump to the end, but he had a good phrase at the very end talking about I don't know, to kind of just outline what you said.
Yeah. There's a thing on 75 that I'm looking at that relates to what I just said. It said, for a photograph gave a concrete reality to the strange sounding date lines and attached faces to the unknown names. Thus, it provided the illusion, at least, that the news had a connection to something within one's sensory experience. It created an apparent context for the news of the day, and the news of the day created a context for the photograph. Next paragraph. But the sense of context created by the partnership of the photograph and headline was, of course, entirely illusory. Then he starts talking about what you brought up. Here's a picture of here's what I'm talking about. Here's a picture of what I'm talking about. It's like, I see what you're talking about.
I see what you're saying.
Because I literally see it. Like, now I fucking see it, so I get it. And now apparently that's equated with understanding what you're saying.
That's learning.
That is learning.
I'm smarter now.
Well, I do think I get smarter from doing this podcast with you. I do also, I was so interesting to me coming back to his sections on the crossword puzzle, because I love crossword puzzles. I love trivia. I love Jeopardy. I love trivia, like trivia games, Trivia Pursuit. And he brings those up in this, in relation to context of like knowing about stuff. Like, do you just know this stuff, or do you know all the things around the stuff that makes it important? Or do you just know what character said this line from a Shakespeare play? Or do you know the author of a book that came out 100 years ago? Or do you know what, you know, subspecies a particular animal exists in? But do you understand the other things that make that meaningful?
Irrelevant, dude. We're
exactly
we're amusing ourselves to death.
But I do love fucking Jeopardy, and I'm going to be on that show. I'm good at knowing things that I don't understand the context in which they exist. I love a crossword puzzle.
That part must have landed hard for you.
Oh, yeah. Because he says, at best, you are left with an amusing bit of trivia, good trading and cocktail party chatter, or solving a crossword puzzle.
Pseudo context.
Nothing more. Nothing more. You will, in fact, have learned nothing.
But the use the pseudo context provides is not action or problem solving or change. It is only use left for information with no genuine connection to our lives.
Wow.
Yeah, I feel like I feel that's been a constant battle in my life, and trying to maintain this constant massive data stream of information, trying to parse through what information is relevant to my life, because the information overload is really really reaching new heights.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never be able to listen to every podcast I want to listen to, every movie I want to see, every song that's made,
Book you want to read.
every book I want to read. So it's can be quite difficult to decide what my time is worth here.
Yeah. So we're almost at the end of the chapter. The chapter ends on page 80. In these last few pages, are there anything that sticks out for you about the pseudo context of the pseudo event, or photography?
There
and
was one
telegraphy?
thing, but I'm still searching for it. I didn't write it down, unfortunately. So
Okay.
if you had something, you can go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting to talk about all these different forms of media when they enter the electronic conversation, which is on 77. And then he starts talking about eventually computer technology. He's on 78. He says, as a small ironic example of this point, consider this. In the past few years, we have been learning that the computer is the technology of the future. Reminder that this was made in 85. The computer is the technology, not only of the future, but the present. And we are told that our children will fail in school and be left behind in life if they are not computer literate. We are told that we cannot run our businesses or compile our shopping lists or keep our checkbooks tidy unless we own a computer. Now, we can't do that without a smartphone, or we can't do that without a computer or without the internet. Many people can't wake up in the morning without their alarm clock being connected to their phone, or notifications being connected to their tablet, that they get everything. And notifications in that way are the empirical proof of peekaboo. All of a sudden, it's like you get a little buzz in your pocket, or you hear a little jingle, and you're like, oh, here's something. Here it is, peekaboo. I'm in your pocket. Now I'm in your brain, and that's what notifications are at their core. Not only are they fueling a particular part of our neurological and biological desires, they're fulfilling something that transcends the neuroscience of it all. Every ping that you get, every like you get on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, it, on one level, it fuels the pleasure centers of the brain, and on another, it's constantly telling you, boom, here it is, boom, here it is, here's a thing, it's peekaboo. And
Those fatty dopamine hits, man, make you feel good.
yeah, dopamine, fucking oxytocin, fucking all the shit. I don't know if serotonin, like any of those things, adrenaline, any of these things that can happen. It's just like we've figured out to our detriment how to fucking activate those things without the use of like substances or without the use of something else. We've artificially been able to enact those things within the biology of the brain through a black mirror, through a screen, through a buzzing sensation on the thigh. We've been able to affect the brain in that very measurable and very apparent way. I do really like how he talks about how television is the command center of everything else. Our use of other media, for example, is largely orchestrated by television, and we structure everything. And now it's through the internet and television. It's both. But now, like, everything around us is influenced and sort of attributed to those things, and in that way, they completely structure public discourse. Because everything is, the context is, I saw it on TV, I saw it on Facebook, I saw it on Twitter, I saw it somewhere, I read it, I know it, I learned from all these things. And that's the context in which discourse is influenced. Is it being there and having been shown to me? Did you find what you were looking for?
I didn't. But I did find something else that piqued my interest a little bit. It's mostly a rehashing of what we already talked about, but I don't know. I thought it was eloquently said with how like straightforward some of his points are. To like back to when he talked about burning its contents, just very very straightforward, and I think this also speaks very strongly. It told for the age of exposition, not of new beginnings, but of an end. Beneath its dying melody, a new note had been sounded, and photography and telegraphy set the key. Theirs was a language that denied interconnectedness, proceeded without context, argued the irrelevance of history, explained nothing.
Oof.
I love it. Just
Postman.
explained nothing.
Oh, Neil Postman. I understand why Tristan Harris was like, you guys, you gotta fucking let me just lay this on you, because he says like, I don't think I've actually ever done any original work. I'm pretty sure it was all just Neil Postman. I'm pretty sure he fucking understood this stuff way before anyone else did, and in a way in greater depth than anyone else that or currently does. Yeah, that he's just, there's so many parts of this book where he's just hitting us with the realness that's like, oh fuck. Oh shit, you're right. We're fucked. This is bad. We learned nothing. But thanks for listening to your podcast, and I hope you learned something. On the bottom of 79, as he's talking about the electronic and graphic revolution, he says, there is no more disturbing consequence of the electronic and graphic revolution than this, that the world as given to us through television seems natural, not bizarre. For the loss of the sense of the strange is a sign of adjustment, and to the extent to which we have adjusted is a measure to the extent to which we have been changed. Our culture's adjustment to the epistemology of television is by now all but complete. We have so thoroughly accepted its definitions of truth, knowledge, and reality that irrelevance seems to be to us filled with import, and incoherence seems entirely sane. Incoherence seems entirely sane.
I think that's what I was looking for. Just those three words right there that you said.
Oh. And that's the peekaboo world. That's social media, where everything's incoherent. There is no
sanity.
The only coherence is that it's on Facebook and I scrolled past it. That's the only thing connecting to the first thing to the last.
Gamer tag, dude. Coherent sanity.
Oh my fucking god. Incoherence is sane. Incoherence. Wow. And then he leaves us in anxious await for the rest of the book. It is his object, he says, in the rest of the book, to make the epistemology of television visible again, to try and demonstrate by concrete example that television's way of knowing is uncompromisingly hostile to typography's way of knowing, that television's conversations promote incoherence and triviality, that the phrase serious television is a contradiction in terms, and that the television speaks in only one persistent voice, the voice of entertainment. Get ready for part 2.
Yeah, that's now a wrap on the part 1.
That is exactly what Huxley feared was coming 50 years ago, now 80 years ago, or coming up on 90 years ago, coming up to a century ago. Huxley feared the irrelevant sanity, or the incoherent sanity. Oh boy, we're about an hour, right?
Yep, 55.
And do you feel good? Do you feel like we did good for the first part of the book, and chapter 5 in particular?
Absolutely. I mean, ideally, we wouldn't be talking for this long, but I'm glad at least it outlines our enthusiasm for this book so far, and we've only read like 80 pages so far, which I think is kind of funny. Yet we've recorded, 4 or 5 hours of material, so I think it's kind of funny how much we've been able to take away so far.
There's a lot to be said. I'm really enjoying talking to you about it. I hope other people enjoy us talking about it, because I'm hoping that we're bringing something like the modern context, and we're bringing sort of other examples that are not in the book that are directly analogous to the examples that he
Mm-hmm.
gives. And I'm hoping that that's fruitful for thought and conversation on some of these things.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We're gonna keep doing this book. We're into part 2, and we're going to then move on to something else. We're going to do maybe a different book or a different topic, and I'm thinking we're going to try to be somewhat coherent in our what this is eventually going to be in the future. So I hope that people find it worthwhile. Now we just have to let people see it and hear it.